Good morning, metalheads of the internet, and welcome to a brand new episode of the Metal Meltdown. As you can tell, we've had a pretty exciting morning, shall we say, so far here at Metal Meltdown HQ. Thrash and Jackson has been blabbing and yapping for hours and hours on end. It's honestly kind of impressive in a way. I mean, still supremely annoying, but honestly impressive. Let's listen to what he's been saying. Like, really listen closely.
Otherwise, it's not true metal. All these woke posers and gay liberals have infiltrated my precious metal, and they've made it less metal as a result of that. And furthermore, I'll have you know that metal used to be real metal. We didn't have to worry about offending a bunch of little queermo liberal crybabies and such.
Like, what is that? What is he going on about? I don't know. Maybe I'm crazy, but all I hear is blah, 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 yap, yap, yap. Don't worry, though, y'all. I spiked his drink. He should be falling asleep in a couple of minutes or so. Or right now. That's fine, too. That works out pretty well for me, actually. So, in my opinion, everything that Thrash and Jackson just ranted and raved about is utterly ridiculous. But unfortunately, there are a slew of metalheads, a slew of people here within the YouTube metalverse that would probably agree with Thrash and Jackson, and also a select few that would make these same arguments and repeat this same rhetoric in videos of their own. And though I'm going to stop myself short of name-dropping these specific content creators because, believe me, they do not need their egos inflated anymore. They do not need their platforms elevated anymore. I would like to take some time to really dissect this rhetoric and these arguments. So today I ask a question. We discuss together as a group, does metal really need to be offensive? Do we need to make metal offensive again? Does metal need to be intolerant and filled with hate constantly in order to be metal? In my opinion, the answer is no. And before one of y'all starts yapping about how I'm just some gay, autistic, liberal SJW who needs everything to be a safe space constantly all the time no matter what, how about you shut the fuck up and let me cook for a goddamn minute? Now, the best way to tackle this conversation, in my opinion, is in little bits and pieces, in little chunks and chapters. So first off, let's discuss. Was metal ever really offensive? Like, originally? No, not really. But also, yes. But not really. But kind of. Okay, not intentionally. I mean, it's fair to argue that metal has always been provocative and has always had the capacity to be offensive with sexually explicit, violent, and satanic imagery and lyricism and such. But I mean, like, is this not also true to an extent of a lot of genres of music in general? Like, there's plenty of violent, sexually explicit, and even dark and even satanic imagery to be found in genres like hip-hop and country. I mean, maybe not so much, like, satanic, but definitely all the other things. And even when music isn't really filled with these things, history has shown time and time again that it doesn't really take much to upset or trigger or offend the average listener. Like, back in the day, people legitimately got pretty fucking mad and worked up over people like Elvis Presley having the audacity to shake their hips on stage for the world to see. There were people extremely and genuinely concerned that Elvis Presley would be corrupting the youth of America by daring to shake his hips. He'd be brainwashing the children into being mindless, sex-loving degenerates. Now, to be fair, nowadays the average person isn't looking at the average rock or pop artist with that level of frustration and fury. There are exceptions, particularly amongst more conservative, religious-leaning people. I remember a couple of years ago, Kim Petras and Sam Smith performed at the Grammys, and that started a whole thing about, like, they're trying to summon the devil! They're trying to make my children gay sex freaks! Oh no! But, that said, I think metal occupies a specific territory because metal is willing to go, and very often does go, into more extreme territory visually and sonically. Like, sure, hip-hop and country musicians sing about violent murder and various sexual escapades and such, But they're not doing so while dressed up like fucking circus clowns, or while dressed up in drag, or, I don't know, dressed up as bisexual vampires. They're also not doing so in extremely gruesome fashion, in the way that a death metal band or a black metal band would. And it's also worth remembering that metal, no doubt as a result of being so much more extreme and graphic and volatile, visually, lyrically, sonically, so on and so forth, has come under fire more so than other music genres over the years. Like, I don't think I need to remind anybody watching this video right now of the PMRC and Tipper Gore and the Filthy 15 in the 80s and everything that these movements and people did to actively censor specifically heavier styles of music. And let's really take a minute to look at the roots of metal as well. Like, let's look at some of the earliest records from like Black Sabbath, Judas Priest, Motorhead. Let's take a look at other records from other bands that were very influential to metal. You know, records from the Jimi Hendrix Experience, Deep Purple, Led Zeppelin, Thin Lizzy. And let's really ask ourselves, were these records really trying to be offensive? Were they offensive at all? Because the answer to both of those questions are, in my opinion, no. Like, Black Sabbath were making the music that they made as a consequence of the environment that they grew up in. Growing up in steel towns, still kind of ravaged and feeling the aftermath of World War II. They also grew up being inspired by classic horror films, and they grew up being inspired by, like, blues music and rock and roll of the time and jazz music, and that all kind of came together into a package to become Black Sabbath. If somebody is or was offended by that, then that's kind of their thing. It's not as if they put this together going, this is gonna freak out the normies. They were just making the music that they wanted to make. And the same can be said for literally every band that I just mentioned a moment ago. Rob Halford wasn't doing screeching falsetto vocals because he wanted to really freak people out and offend them. That's just his singing voice, and that's what he wanted to do. Or, you know, maybe a better example is like Judas Priest in their fashion. We've talked about this in the past, but Judas Priest's signature look, this kind of like leather daddy, biker S&M kind of fusion thing they got going on, this was inspired by like actual leather subculture and like different shit that was happening in the UK in underground queer clubs and different scenes and stuff. It's heavily inspired by queer artists and designers. And Judas Priest didn't take this influence specifically to shock or provoke or offend anybody. They just took it because that was their look and that's the look that they wanted to have. Now that said, I concede that when these content creators and when these people are talking about metal needing to be offensive again, metal needing to be intolerant and hateful, they're probably not talking about Judas fucking Priest and Black fucking Sabbath. They're probably not talking about classic hard rock and heavy metal. They're probably not talking about thrash metal. They're definitely not talking about glam metal. They're very probably talking about a lot of extreme metal. They're very probably, very definitely talking specifically about a lot of death and black metal. And to be fair, these genres were designed really in a way to be more provocative and more offensive. I mean, graphic depictions of gore, body horror, sexual and physical violence are pretty common within death metal. And I mean, for fuck's sakes, there's an entire movement of black metal literally called Nationalist Socialist Black Metal. Literally Nazi black metal. But simultaneous to that, not every death metal band is doing that super graphic, gory shit. And also, not every black metal band is doing full-blown Nazi bullshit. Like, a band like Nile isn't going into the hyper-violent, gory territory that a band like Cannibal Corpse or Dying Fetus or Devourment typically goes into. Does that make them somehow less death metal? I don't think so. And by that same token, I don't consider a band like Enslaved to be less black metal than like fucking Burzum or Mayhem or Darkthrone or Immortal or whomever else, just because their music is like less hateful or more progressive musically. And I guess this kind of makes a good transition into our next talking point. Why do you need metal to be offensive? In some of these videos made by some of these content creators who will remain nameless, these content creators argue that metal needs to be pure, that it needs to look and sound and act a certain way. It can't be woke, it can't be a safe space, it can't be insert fucking hyper online right-wing buzzword here. It needs to be offensive and hateful and intolerant because that's what true metal is. Which is really funny because, like, guys, what fundamentally changes about the quality of your favorite lo-fi, raw, underground black metal if, like, the singer puts in, like, a semi-political lyric, or maybe isn't, like, as hateful or intolerant as you want them to be? What fundamentally changes if, like, a melody is introduced? Like, is the song suddenly completely derailed to the point of being just utter garbage? I think it's just fundamentally a really goofy, childish argument, like, it's only true metal because I said it's true metal. It's only true metal because it meets my standards. Like, I don't know, man. I just don't think it really fucking matters. Like, I think that something can be metal without having to fit into a little box of what you perceive as being metal. And also, again, why do you need it to be offensive? Why do you need it to be intolerant? Why does it need to be offensive and have offensive imagery and lyricism in order for you to like it and deem it as metal? It sounds like the issue isn't so much that metal has gone a certain direction or whatever, as I'm sure you would like to frame it. It sounds more so like the issue is that you're just kind of an offensive, intolerant person, and you need metal to also be that way so that you can feel more comfortable in your beliefs. And again, without naming these content creators directly, I will say one of them, in a video that may or may not have inspired this video, rants and raves over and over about how, you know, some metal bands are non-hetero, and that's bad. Like, brother, what are you talking about? By that logic, is Judas Priest, the forefather of metal, now bad? Rob Halford is an openly gay man. Like, what fundamentally changes about the quality of a Judas Priest song or a Judas Priest album, knowing or not knowing that he's gay? And like another content creator who will also remain unnamed, but also has made multiple videos that may or may not have inspired this particular video, you've literally used your platform to advocate for violence. You've literally gone on record spouting, like, racist, xenophobic rhetoric. And I love, too, how you specifically are like, metal isn't about safe spaces, but you go out of your way to make sure your channel is a safe space for you. Like, you actively hide and delete comments that aren't in total alignment with what you're saying. You actively block users who consistently are not in alignment with what you're saying. Perhaps the funniest thing, though, is that when you go to this specific content creator's YouTube page, specifically through the mobile YouTube app, and you try to leave a comment, there's a little disclaimer. You're given some guidelines as to how to comment, and one of them says, be civil and respectful. Which is it, buddy? Do you need metal to be intolerant or hateful? Or do you just want everybody to get along? You just need everything. Guys, let's be civil and respectful. Like, I don't know, maybe I'm crazy, but I don't think you can advocate for no safe spaces while going out of your way to make your channel a safe space for you and for people who think like you. I don't think you can sit here and say that metal needs to be intolerant and hateful and then also plead with people to be civil and respectful in the comments section below. Can't we just get along, guys? Can't we just get along? And this, coupled with the knowledge that these content creators are pretty quick to fly off the handle when you mention certain bands and certain albums and certain ideas around them, adds dimension to the narrative of metal needing to be offensive. Because it's not just that metal needs to be offensive or intolerant or hateful because that's the music you want to hear. It's not just that it needs to be these things to justify the beliefs that you have but are sometimes hesitant to share. It's now also that metal needs to be offensive but only on your terms. Because otherwise, you're offended. And this kind of brings us full circle because I would argue if inoffensive metal offends you, then maybe inoffensive metal isn't the problem. Maybe you are. And maybe metal is still offensive. Okay, so just so we're all on the same page here, the argument is that metal has been fundamentally altered and changed. It has undergone a radical transformation at the hands of the non-heteros and woke posers. It has been made so inoffensive and weak and fake to the point of no longer being recognizably metal. And this makes you mad. It makes you so mad that you make video after video after video detailing how mad you are, how upset this makes you, talking about how metal needs to look and act and sound a very specific way in order for you to feel comfortable. It needs to be offensive. It needs to be raw and tolerant and hateful. You need your beliefs represented in the music for you to enjoy it, for you to recognize it as metal. And in the process, you also plead with people to be civil and respectful. You go out of your way to make sure your channel is a safe space for you and for like-minded people. If you are doing all of this, then are you not actually doing what you claim everyone else is doing to make metal what it is now? And are you not in the process displaying that you're very offended? And if that is the case, is modern metal still offensive, just in a different way? Just in a way that you don't consider offensive, and therefore it's bad? Like, I know it sounds like I'm doing some argumentative acrobatics here. I know it sounds like a bit of word salad and mumbo-jumbo, but like, really think about it for a second. The argument is essentially that metal is inoffensive and I'm offended by it, and it needs to be something else in order for me to recognize it as being metal. And until it is that thing, I will be offended by it. By this logic, modern metal, inoffensive modern metal is offensive and therefore metal. Okay? Just throwing that out there. And this also ignores the fact that there are plenty of death and black and extreme metal bands that are still putting out very provocative material. It just doesn't happen to meet the standards of what these content creators deem as offensive, and therefore it's bad and not real metal. Like, a band like Cattle Decapitation can very easily be billed as a very hateful band. They're just not hateful of the things that these content creators want them to be hateful of. They're hateful of the greed and stupidity and ignorance of humanity. They're hateful of environmental, economic disasters. They're hateful of how humanity has ravaged and drained the planet of its resources. They literally have songs specifically advocating for the violent and brutal punishment of the worst of humanity, of bigots, of transphobes, of greedy, heartless morons. They literally have a song that advocates for mass extinction. They literally have a song that advocates for bringing back the plague. It's called Bring Back the Plague, and it was released at the very beginning of a global pandemic. But here's the thing, that's not the same. It isn't hateful in the way that these content creators want it to be. It isn't offensive and provocative in the way that these content creators want it to be, because it's woke. It's well produced. Ew! And this kind of goes back to my original point. Metal is not by design, by intention, offensive. Like, there are bands that do design and do intend for their music, for their work to be offensive. They want that. Cough, cough, nsbm. There's no way you play nsbm and you're like, wait, people are offended by this? That's so weird. Why would that? No way. Never happened. Never gonna happen. But people do make music and people do react to that. Tipper Gore and the PMRC and a bunch of white suburban moms and parents and politicians reacted to Motley Crue and Iron Maiden and Wasp in the 80s, and they said, that's bad, that's offensive, I don't like it, get rid of it forever. In the same way that these content creators are looking at Cattle Decapitation and a slew of other modern rock and metal bands and going, that's bad, I don't like it, that's offensive, but the caveat here is that they will argue it's not offensive in the way that I want it to be offensive. It's inoffensive because it's not what I want it to be. So ultimately, as I see it at least, the issue isn't that metal needs to be offensive and it isn't. The issue is more so that you need to be validated. Your beliefs, your ideas, your perception of metal isn't being validated, and you need it to be. And you need that because you have made being true metal, being the most intolerant, badass, metal elitist ever, your entire personality. This is fundamentally who you are. There is nothing else about you, nothing interesting, at least. You are a hateful, delusional little loser, and you need metal to be offensive because you need metal to validate the things that you believe. You need metal to reflect what you are so that you are more comfortable. And personally, I think that that's kind of sad. I think that you would benefit from some therapy. I think that you would benefit from kind of going outside your bubble, talking to different kinds of people and trying to learn different perspectives and ideas. And I think you would benefit from talking less about what you hate in music and more about what you love in music. I think you would benefit from learning to love metal for what it is, rather than hating it for what it isn't or for what you think it should be. But hey, I'm probably talking to a brick wall here, so fuck it. You've probably made up your minds. You've decided a long time ago this is the hill that you're going to die on. And there's no doubt in my mind that if you figure out that I'm talking about you, you're gonna write something about how I'm just some fucking woke poser, I'm a non-hetero, I'm a gay, autistic, liberal, I should be lobotomized or whatever. Whatever. I mean, that just kind of proves my point, but if that makes you feel better, then fucking go for it, I guess. So in conclusion, my argument is that metal is not an offensive genre, not by design, not by intention, but it does have the capacity and ability to be offensive, much like many other subgenres of music out there. And it's ultimately up to you to decide what you're comfortable with, not me, not these content creators, it's up to you. And the very idea that metal is less metal because it isn't spouting like horrible, racist, hateful rhetoric or whatever, I think is fundamentally stupid, and it says a lot about who you are as a human being. So boom, there you have it. I think that's it for me. I'm gonna get Thrashin' Jackson to the hospital. He's been unconscious for a little too long. It's concerning, honestly. Subscribe, other videos, have a great day, and if this video offends you, I promise you I don't fucking give a shit.